second session of the research series from planning to presenting. Today, we will dive into the world of planning your publication. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Lin Al-Jawish. I'm the current vice lead of IVPN student, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. Before we start, I'd like you to know the following. This webinar will be recorded, and you can access the recording on the IVPN network website at the end of the session. Also, we encourage you to subscribe to the listserv of the IVPN network via the IVPN network website. And also at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A section, so feel free to type your questions in the chat box. Now, let me introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Gareth Dyke. Dr. Gareth is a prolific scientific author who has published more than 320 articles in peer-reviewed journals over the last 25 years, including in Nature Science, Proceedings of the National Academy, and other high-profile outlets. His research has been widely covered in the media, and he is often invited to present talks and lead workshops around the world. Most recently in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, China, Colombia, Spain, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. In-person workshops in China, also run by Dr. Gareth in 2019, were attended by more than 5,000 colleagues. He has conducted thousands of online trainings, including for Springer Nature, Research Square, EDANS, Top Edit, and the Charles Worth Group, as well as for numerous universities globally. So thank you, Doctor, for accepting our invitation, and we highly appreciate it. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thank you to everybody joining this event, and thank you to Michelle and Mohammed and to Lynn for setting everything up and organizing everything, and it's great to see everyone. Thank you again. My name's Gareth, and tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about planning your publication, a few pathways to success, and as Lynn mentioned, after a while, we'll have a Q&A session, so don't forget to put your questions, comments, feedback into the chat box, into the Q&A box, and we'll be back a little bit later to answer any of your questions. So in this series, in this IVPN student webinar series, we're talking about helping you navigate the academic publishing cycle. And this is kind of a hamster wheel that all academics go round and around and around all of the time. You have an idea. You need to think about getting funding for that idea, collecting data around that idea, journal selection, paper writing, submission, and peer review and publication. And what we do is we try to help around the cycle. So you might have several papers at different stages of this academic cycle. You may have several things in different stages of the cycle. And so you might need help with different bits and pieces. But today, in our event today, we're talking about the planning stage. And that really contains three important elements. So today, this evening, we will be talking about journal selection. We will be talking about maximizing your impact when you start to develop a research project plan and start to put an article together. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about how you can begin the writing process with an impactful title and an impactful abstract. And then later in the series, we'll talk in more detail about other aspects of that cycle as you build up a roadmap, a plan, a structure towards being successful at writing and publishing your academic work. And that's what the point of all of this is. At the end of the day, we are here. IVPN student is here to help you become more effective as an academic. So training, helping, tips and tricks, ideas for the academic publishing cycle. So today's event, journal selection, maximizing impact, and talking about the title and abstract in terms of impactful publishing. So let's dive in, let's begin, let's start off our planning process as we think about planning a publication with initial journal selection. So as you begin this process, as you start to think about putting an article together for eventual publication, the most important starting point is being an effective communicator. You'll increase your chance of publication and research impact if you have efficient writing strategies and if you are aware of how to put together effective titles, keywords, and abstracts, which is something that we're going to come back to a little bit later on in our event today. But being an effective communicator, a writer, the way that you talk to editors, the way that you interact with journals is very, 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 very important at all stages of the publication cycle. When we start to think about which journal we're going to select for our next paper, and so on. And so journal selection is very critical as an early step in your publication planning process. Most people, me included, used to write papers and then think, where am I going to publish this paper? Which journal would be appropriate for this study after the article is written? And I would argue strongly now, on the basis of lots of research experience, lots of publishing experience, lots of work with publishers, that really the first step in being effective with publishing your research is thinking initially, often before you begin the writing process, which journal you're gonna target with your research and with your topic, with your research writing. And the reason for that, of course, is that there are many, 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 many papers published all the time, every year. About 2 million academic papers published every year, about 30,000 published every month, just in the medical, pharmaceutical, and health sciences. So picking a journal where your work will appear, where it will be published, where it will come out and appear on the feeds, on the searches of other researchers, is a really critical first step in your publication planning journey. And it also, as you'll see in a moment, helps a lot with the writing process, because if you have a journal in mind, you know lots of things about the structure of the paper that you plan to write. So journal selection, very important. Ensure that your work stands out from all of the other work that gets published in your research field, and ensure that other people see your work, read your work, and cite your work. We ask authors all the time, all around the world, we ask them, why do you want to get your work published? And authors, researchers have different answers to this basic question. Some want to get published to get funding. They have a higher chance of getting funding if they've got more publications. They want to get promoted, perhaps, to get tenure, maybe move up that academic ladder in their research institution. Or, as is sometimes the case, often the case, to get their master's or get their PhD degree. This is important. Often at universities around the world, getting a paper published in a SCI listed, a Scopus listed journal is a key qualifying criteria for gaining your PhD or gaining your master's. And some people, some friends, some colleagues just want to publish papers to advance research and development. Think about your motivations for writing and publishing your research work in international journals, because your motivations are quite different to the motivations of editors and peer reviewers, those people who will initially assess your work when you submit it to a journal. And we call the first stage of article submission to an international journal, to a peer-reviewed journal, editorial triage. It's a bit like getting hit by a bus. If you go out on the street and get run over by a bus, you get rushed to the hospital. And then the first thing that the doctors do is they assess you to see what's going to happen next. And the same thing happens with article submissions to journals. Journal selection is important because it can then help your paper's chances of acceptance by picking an appropriate journal, because desk editors at journals, they think when papers come in to their editorial offices, does this article fit with the journal's scope? Does it have a clear message? Is it original? Is it important? Is it true? And is it relevant to our readers? As we'll talk about in this event today, you've got to sell yourself, sell your work to get your work successfully into those international journals through the triage stage. High impact factor journals want to maintain high rejection rates. As you know, 9 out of 10 papers that go to Nature, that go to Science, get rejected often before peer review. So don't start to write your next paper until you have decided on a target journal to select, a target journal to target with your research article. And this is before you even begin the writing process, stage 1 of the publication planning process. Talk to others, talk to colleagues, make what we call pre-submission inquiries to journals. Ask editors over email, would you be interested in considering this paper for submission to your journal? Very, very important, because this early stage of the publication planning process is really a marriage between your research and its eventual publication. So researchers ask us all the time about this, and they are looking, when selecting a journal, for impact factor, for reputation, for that journal's reach within the field, and for whether or not the journal is open access or not, which we'll talk about in a moment. But these are the criteria that researchers tend to have in mind when thinking about selecting a journal. Impact factor, reputation, its reach within the field, whether or not it is open access or not. So in terms of picking a journal for your research, and remember, it's important to do this before you begin to write, I would say aim high. Go for journals with higher impact factors if possible. But of course, you've got to choose appropriately, and you've got to learn to sell and manage your submission all the way through the process. Sorry about that. You've got to aim high, you've got to choose appropriately, and you've got to learn to sell and manage your submission all the way through the process, all the way through the journey of academic article writing and publishing. This is very, very important. The rules for journal selection: aim high, choose appropriately, and learn to sell and manage your submission. And we do recommend a journal selection tool that's called the EdAnts Journal Selector tool. If you're looking for a good way to pick a journal, you can go to edants.com. You can go to the EdAnts Journal Selector. It's really, at the moment, the only independent journal selection tool that doesn't have a tie to a publisher. So that is really important. You can go in, you can put keywords, you can put your abstract into the EdAnts Journal Selector tool, and it will give you advice on where you might go with your paper for your next article submission. So that's a recommendation from us, the EdAnts Journal Selector tool. So authors want, with their submissions, as we've already talked about in this event this evening, speed, reach and readership, and a decent impact factor. That's what is key to authors when they select article publication routes, when they go in and when they think about where they're going to submit a journal, an article to a journal for final submission. Speed, high reach and readership, and a decent impact factor. Now, talking about open access, of course, a big area of confusion for many researchers around the world. What does it mean? Well, there are two main kinds of article open access. The first kind is fully open access. This is called gold open access, PLOS journals, Biomed Central, Frontiers, MDPI, journals where your paper once published is open and accessible to everybody. These journals often have decent impact factors. They're open, they're fully gold open access, but unfortunately, as you'll be also well aware, they often levy what we call an article processing charge, a fee for authors to publish their work in those journals. This is gold open access. By the way, if you find a society journal that's publishing fully open access without any publishing fee, fantastic. Those we call diamond open access journals. In the green model, you get your paper accepted in a journal like Nature or Science or wherever that usually allows access to that content behind a paywall, behind a subscription, but you as an author are allowed to put a late stage draft of your work, the final submitted version, for example, onto a site like ResearchGate or academia.edu or onto your own website. So everybody around the world can access a late stage version, not the final version unless they have a subscription. This is called green open access. And for many authors and many funding agencies, this is considered appropriate and okay for the positioning of a final article. However, when selecting a journal, when thinking about where to send your paper to, which journal to send your paper to, it's important to consider making pre-submission inquiries before you have finished the work to tee up to get a journal interested. You can write emails, as many as you like, to as many journal editors as you like. Speed up the process of article acceptance by sending pre-submission inquiries. Write to editors, select a target journal effectively, reach out to them with a title and abstract potentially. We can give you an email template at the end of this event to help you with that. You can put your title, your abstract out there in front of editors around the world, write a pre-submission inquiry and see if they would be interested in looking at your paper in their journal. Speed up the publication process as part of that the publication planning stage. So initially in this event today, we talked about the earliest stage of publication planning, which really, I would say, should be thinking about where you're going to target that publication. Which journal are you going to look at for your final publication? Stage one, because it really helps with building out the article. In stage two, we're also then looking at maximizing our impact as researchers. We have 3 ideas in mind before we begin the writing process. We have a message. What is the key takeaway of our research article? We know our audience. That's our target journal. And that target journal gives us the structure of our writing. And we build out a structure. We build out that audience. That's the target journal. That gives us the shape of our research paper. And this helps us, of course, to build our impact. Effective writing and submission of research articles and building your impact as a researcher is more than just where you publish your research. It's more than just academic impact. It's also about the socioeconomic impacts and outcomes of your research. So let's think as we plan our research projects, what is it that's going to help us to maximize our work's scholarly and socioeconomic impact? And all of this builds together into a rewarding publication experience, because of course we count papers, we look at impact factors, R and H indices. Our institutions count citations, they look at circulation, but does your research article circulation translate to impact? How many researchers will actually cite and use your work? What is more important in terms of impact might be the difference that your research is making to the lives of ordinary people, particularly in biomedical sciences and fields like pharmacy, I would say in particular. And of course, impact factors, we know they're problematic. They have limited coverage in some subject areas, in humanities and social sciences, in more qualitative areas of polypharmacy, for example. It's difficult to find journals that would be suitable to publish our research that also have decent impact factors. Researchers know this, of course, publishers know this, but we're still in a movement to convince institutions around the world to move away from this impact factor only based metric to assess research. Because of course, we all do citation analysis. We all look at that as a metric for our research articles. This, of course, is a way of measuring the impact of an author, an article, or a publication by counting the number of times that that work has been cited by other works. Very, very important. We're all aware of the different tools that we would use as researchers to do this: Web of Science, Scopus, even Google Scholar. And where many of us, I hope, if you're not, you should be signed up with an ORCID ID so that other researchers can find you, they can locate your work, they can build out a picture of what you're working on, and you can easily track and look at the work of other researchers. By the way, as well, an ORCID ID is now very often essential for the submission stage of article journal publishing. Academic impact, what is that? What does that really mean? It's something that has had a relatively shallow increase in terms of our understanding of impact factors over time, but still very important for funding agencies, very important for our institutions to understand where we are publishing our research. But I give you some other ideas to think about in terms of measuring the metrics of research impact. When you make a design, how do you represent your research? How are you engaging with people around the world with your research? What is the early impact of your research publication? Not just its citations, but how it affects people, how it builds into the local economy, the socioeconomic benefits of the work, the research that you do. And how are you going to reflect and sustain that impact into the future, both as a researcher, maybe running a research group or building a research environment at your research institution, but as well writing grants and thinking about the future directions of the research that you do. It's much more than just where you publish your papers. I would like to emphasize that in this presentation. As an example, I might be working on tobacco, let's say, and I could be writing papers on the molecular genetics of tobacco. I could be building a research group that looks at how the tobacco genome has changed, how molecular genetics of this important economic resource have changed over time. And I'm writing just about that. There's only going to be a very small, a very tiny group of people around the world that really are interested in this particular kind of research, molecular genetics of tobacco. But if I build in socioeconomic components, health components, reasons why this is important to the lifestyles, the economy, the development of economies and people's health around the world, this makes my research much more relevant. It makes my research much more interesting. It makes my research much more engaging. More people will read it. You build around your basic research a bigger picture that people will engage with, people are interested in, and people will take and use and build on in the future. So the point of this is to help and to ask you to start thinking about your research questions, not just in an academic context, but in a wider socioeconomic context in terms of the impact of the work that you do, because that's important, not just for you as a researcher and for your research group and your institution, but also for the impact, the readership, and the socioeconomic benefits of the work that you do. So a number of resources like Kudos are out there for us to help us plan research projects. We think about planning research projects not just in the context of what happens during the project, but also on publication, and then importantly, on an ongoing basis. And this is something that many researchers miss around the world. They don't think about the planning of their research into the future, how their individual publications relate to a wider, bigger research program. And to do this, of course, you have to promote yourself all the time. Know those channels, know where you're putting your research out into the wider world. What works for you? What works for your region? What works for your subject area? What areas, what channels, what social media platforms are researchers in your environment engaging with? So in the case of the IVPN network, IVPN student, LinkedIn is a very important platform, as we see all the time. Talk about your research, talk about its benefits, its socioeconomic impacts, build that into the way that you plan your research publications, because research impact in the planning stages is a journey. Your inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and immediate benefits of the research that you do, those impacts at the end of the day. Very, very, very important. And this is a great graphic that we took from Fast Track Impact, which is a website, an organization that's a very good place to go if you're thinking about building the impact of your research. Fast Track Impact. This is a great graphic that you can use in a grant application, for example. You can use it the next time you have to put together a presentation, when you talk about why your research is building in a particular direction and how you're developing impact as you plan your research projects and build them out to eventual publication. So this is worth having a look at. And our strategies for engagement as well. Develop those public engagement skills. We have lots of training, lots of courses. We can definitely help with this as well. Giving presentations, building as a researcher your ability to explain the value of your work, justify your funding, and show the impact of your research. Public engagement is a skill that you can develop. You are able to communicate effectively about your research. Building those communication skills, not just online and face-to-face presentations, but how you talk about your research in the planning and publication stages. Very, very important. So let's assess our impact. Attention, interest, desire, and action. Wouldn't it be great to have this information about research projects that we're involved in? Let's imagine we get called in for a job interview or a PhD interview or a grant interview. You can talk about these kinds of things to give an assessment, an evaluation of the impact that your research is having. Not just downloads, not just press coverage, not just citations, not just clicks, but also mentions, shares. Quantify your impact as much as possible as you build that into the planning process. It's very important, and it could help you to get a job. It could help you to get a grant funded in the future. So I would say that developing your presentation skill set is a key skill, especially for early career researchers building their careers, talking about the stories that underlie your research. And by the way, this is also a great technique to think about how you put papers together, because of course, a story around a research article, its wider influence, its wider relevance, gives you a much better opportunity to get that work published in a higher impact factor academic journal. But don't forget as well, as Terry Pratchett, one of my most favorite fantasy fiction authors, used to say, people like to be told what they already know. What people think they want is news, but actually what they want is what they already know, old as we call it. So what this means is that research is incremental. It builds on what people think they already know. Large steps forward, much harder to get published in the literature. You want people to come to the end of one of your academic articles, one of your research papers, and think, I agree. I expected that. I think that is true. And not just your readers, your peer reviewers and editors as well. Don't expect too much from your readers. You want them to think that I agree with this. I think this experimental result is likely to be correct. That's important, very important to keep in mind your readers all of the time when putting your academic papers together. And so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit in the third part of this quick presentation this evening about some ideas for putting your paper together. And don't worry, we'll come back. We'll be talking more about the different other sections of a research paper in future sessions in this series. But to begin with, and perhaps most importantly, your title and abstract when you write your paper. So we talked about journal selection, the first stage of the process. And we've also discussed a little bit in this session today about how you can build a strategy for maximizing impact with your research articles. When you write, when you put your papers together, it's very important to think all of the time about your readers. Readers are the most important people in academic publishing, and lots of researchers forget that. They write papers with their own team, their own research group, their own colleagues in mind. And we don't write papers just to put them on the wall or send them to our parents as presents. We write papers so people will cite them, people will use them, and people will put them into their own research projects. So think about your research question, the message of your paper. Why is it important? Are you addressing something unknown, a limitation, or a controversy? What are your aims? What do you plan to achieve? And how do your aims relate to the problem that your article addresses? Remember the 3 things you need to know before you start to write: your message, your audience, that's your target journal, and the structure of your writing, which comes from your target journal. Guiding your readers with your writing is very important. And of course, how you conclude the paper, also key. Answer a question. How does your work advance the field? How does it all fit together to give a direct, impactful advance in your particular subject area? So we link ideas together. Article title from Nature. It tells you something about a result. This is called a declarative title, by the way, and it's one of the kinds of article titles that you could choose for your next paper. Matrix protein agrin promotes heart regeneration in mice, for example. This is a declarative title. It tells you the result of the study. This protein promotes heart regeneration in mice. That is one kind of title that you could choose for a study that you put together. And we'll look at some other examples in a moment. But above all, building out the structure of your research writing, which is something that we'll emphasize in later sessions in this series, is critical. Readers need to know where they've come from, where they are now, and where they're going. It's just like watching a movie or reading a book, detective story. A plot is needed. A paper is a story. Structure is very important. And you'll all be familiar, I hope, with the general structure of a broadly shaped research article with title, authors, abstracts, and keywords. These are the most important bits of the paper initially to get your readers interested. Editors and peer reviewers, they've got to be easy for indexing and searching, informative, attractive, and effective. And then the rest of the paper, the IMRAD structure, which of course we'll come back to in later sessions, these have distinct functions for your readers. They have distinct things that they do in the process. But to talk about titles initially, a good research paper title should contain the fewest possible words that adequately describe the contents of the paper. Keep it short. Article titles less than 7 words actually get more citations in the academic literature. So identify the main issue. Begin with the subject. Be accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations, and get your readers interested in reading the paper. Make your title compelling, concise, and informative. The most important words related to the topic. Get the readers enticed, allured, attracted into reading the study. This is very important. Declarative titles or non-declarative titles where you do not give the answer. You say a new drug and its influence on cancer rather than a new drug is the cure for cancer. Non-declarative versus declarative titles. Many medical journals want non-declarative titles. Why is that? Well, they want researchers, pharmacists, clinicians, doctors to actually read the whole of the paper before they start prescribing drugs or cutting people open. They want non-declarative titles mostly. So we'll keep that in mind. We'll come back to this. We'll talk about this in later sessions when we talk about article writing. But secondly, in terms of planning your publication, the abstract is also important. And I know that it's difficult. Many people struggle with putting together an impactful abstract, 200 or 300 words that give all of the information necessary about a particular study, but you've got to be honest and precise. This has to stand alone because your abstract works with search engines. It's often the only piece of your writing, of your article that lots of people are going to read. So no technical jargon, short and specific. The quality of your title and your abstract will inform your editor's decision about what to do with the study, whether to send it out for peer review or not. Remember editorial triage. Many high impact factor journals reject lots of papers before peer review. So keep that in mind. A great abstract is essential, but sadly, many authors write their abstracts in a great rush, almost as an afterthought. You can do this though, easily and simply by using what we call the 4-question-based technique for writing a great abstract. The 4 questions are here. We'll see them again in a moment. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? If you write down those 4 questions and answer them, you will be able to build an effective abstract for your next paper. 4 basic questions. Write them down and then answer them with a few sentences about your own research. That gives you the key to an effective abstract. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? Then, of course, you can delete the questions and you end up with a bunch of text that you can edit together. It's got that structure, that sequence that we need to see to have an effective written piece of work. And you can do this in papers. You can go to a paper in your field, for example, and go with a colored marker, with a colored pen, mark off the answers to those different questions in sequence through the abstract. I've done it here in this example on the slide, but you can do it too. You can see, oh, Gareth, do I believe him? Go to a paper published in a journal in your field and see if you can find answers to these questions in sequence, because effective abstracts attract readers. Remember your readers. They don't have time to read everything published in the field. They read abstracts every day to stay up to date on research in their field. And your abstract is often the only thing that gets read by other researchers in your research area. So titles and abstracts as part of publication planning, very, very important. So you can build the questions out. You can see the questions, as I mentioned, in an abstract. Why does the study need to be done? What did you do? What did you find? And how does this study advance the field? What did you conclude at the end of the article? We give you a few worked examples and we can give you these slides. You'll have access, of course, to this recording at the end of the session, but you can go through, and here's a paper on diet, lifestyle, and gut microbiota composition, the answers to the 4 questions in sequence in the abstract of this paper. What did you do? How did you do it? What did you find? And what did you conclude? Build your papers with structure. This is the key to success. Academic papers have an egg timer-like structure. The shape of academic papers looks like this. They start general and they get more specific. The introduction has to be general to hook people in, getting more specific down into the methods and results, and then getting more general out there in the discussion. You begin your discussion by answering the question that your paper seeks to address. So this is important. And as we mentioned in later sessions, we'll come back and we'll start to talk about how you can logically link your ideas throughout your manuscript, build it into an effective academic article. But planning a paper, very important. Your bottom line here is that you will get published if you pick an important research question. You will get published if you choose the right method to answer that research question. You've got to write a short, clear, concise account of the study, following a tight structure and using effective writing to convey your message clearly. We are here to help. IVPN student, working with other colleagues, Dr. Kawa, I'm here as well myself. Like, we are always available to help you with your research. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation today. Structure is key. Thank you again, and thank you for your attention. Thanks for the opportunity to do this evening. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Dr. Garrett. Personally, I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed the session too. And I'm confident that our participants have learned a lot too. So now we're opening the Q&A section. Make sure to write your question. You can also raise your hand so I can unmute you to ask. So we have Nimra is saying, great session. Your energy is unmatched, and I agree.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, as Michelle is kindly pointing out here in the chat. Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, we have a question from Hasnain. What are the limitations of research using machine learning and artificial intelligence?
Wow, that's a great question. Thank you, Hasnain. That's really an interesting question. So in terms of research, there's two aspects to the use of AI at the moment in research and publishing. Like, people are using AI for data collection, data analysis on the kind of research side of things. And then they're also using AI, of course, in the kind of writing and publishing side of things. And there's no problem with either. No problem with either, so long as you are explicit, Hasnain, about what you've been doing and how you've been doing it. So what I mean by that is, if you submit a paper to a journal that's been partly written or translated or edited using an AI tool, that's not a problem, but you need to tell the journal that you did that. Okay, that's the important step. And different publishers have different guidelines now on this, but kind of converging quickly towards this basic position where, of course, everyone's using AI, of course, but we would like to know about it so that we can use that to evaluate the paper. We can use that as a way of assessing the quality of the research. So I think we're in a fantastic time for researchers at the moment, especially non-native English-speaking researchers. There's many, many ways that you can speed up the writing and publishing process. Also, data collection, data analysis, but don't use AI to fabricate data. Don't use AI to make up data. Just stay within the boundaries of research ethics, you know, and we're all hopefully aware of what those boundaries are. And be explicit, be open when you make submissions and when you talk about your research at conferences and in presentations about what you did. I used X, Y, and Z AI tools to generate these data or collect these data or analyze these data. That's fine. Just let's be open and talk about it. So it's a long answer, Hasnain. Sorry about that, but there are no limitations as long as we're open and explicit, I would argue. So thank you for the question. Great question.
Great, thank you, Doctor. Also, Abdul Fattah is asking how he can become a scientific researcher, like for a bachelor student. How can he start?
Wow, well, that's a great question. How can you start to be, I mean, you need to be associated with or mentored by like a research group potentially. So one of the first things to do, I would say, is, you know, I guess decide on what kinds of research you're interested in. In this presentation, I should think it's probably pharmacy, pharmacology, polypharmacy, like, you know, drugs and the related chemistry and social impacts of those kinds of topics. But, you know, to get involved in research, you have to have like a kind of inquiring mind. You have to be interested, but you need mentorship. You need to get connected with researchers working in an area that you're interested in, and then maybe think about going to graduate school or doing a master's, a PhD. There are so many ways. I mean, I would say that the IVPN network is fantastic at this because it provides like strong mentoring and strong connections for young researchers. So just by attending sessions like this, you're doing the right thing, I would say. But get connected with other people within the community and find out what research is happening and get involved, I would say. Yeah, to answer that question. Fantastic question. Thank you.
Great. We have Muhammad is asking, how many review article or research papers do we need to evaluate to find the research gap, and how we can find the research gap?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. Thank you for this, Mohammed. Yeah, there's no number that I can give. How many papers do I need to read in order to find a research gap? I mean, a research gap is what we're looking for as researchers that we're going to fill, that we're going to work on. It's a question. It's something that we're going to spend our time and energy evaluating. Okay. So often when you read a paper, you see in the discussion or in the introduction ideas for research gaps. I mean, you might read a paper about, let's say, the efficacy of a particular drug within a particular population in a particular region. And you think, wouldn't it be interesting to evaluate this in another region or in another population? And that's a research gap, right? So that could come from just reading one paper. I mean, you need to keep up to date with the literature in your field. I would say try to read as much as you can. Keep up, what's happening in your research area, because these research gaps, they pop up all the time. You'll see them. You'll think, I could work on that. I could, evaluate that. I could build a research project on that. The trick, Mohammed, and this comes with experience as you get more experience as a researcher, the trick is figuring out which of these research gaps are worth working on, right? Which are relevant and which are trivial, which are a waste of money and which would be worth pursuing. So that is why you need mentorship, again, like working with a more senior researchers, a research group that will help you with this, because of course it's very easy to go down blind alleys, spend money and time working on questions that are not going to be broadly interesting. I mean, I think of an example. I mean, if I read a paper about the efficacy of a particular drug, in, let's say, one part of the UAE, it might not be all that worthwhile to do a study on another emirate, because it's not going to be that, different, not going to be that, show that much in terms of positive results and differences. That might not be a useful use of time, just as an example off the top of my head. But thank you for that great question. Thank you very much.
Okay, now moving to Muhammad Wael, he raised his hand. I've unmuted you. You can. Okay.
Okay, my voice is clear?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Prof. Gareth, for this informative session. Actually, I have one question. Is there a limit for number of words in abstract, or it's open?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Mohammed. It depends on the journal. I mean, so that's why it's important to target a journal before you begin writing, because different journals have different style guidelines and different lengths. I mean, generally, most STM papers abstracts are going to be, I would say, 200 to 300 words, but it depends on the journal, because some journals in medical sciences, pharmacy, pharmacology would give an extended abstract that actually contains more information about the method. So pick a journal, find a target journal, and you do this by evaluating the research in your field, finding out where similar studies to the one that you want to publish have recently been published, go to those journals, and then that will answer your question. So no right or wrong answer, depends on the journal. Thank you very much for the question. Great question. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Aisha. She's saying that this is a wonderful session. Can you please explain with an example, perhaps from one of your papers, on how you managed to market your research by crafting it like a story? Since you indicated that you don't restrict this to abstract presentations for conferences.
Can you repeat the question, please, Lynn? Because
Yeah.
your audio was breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Can you please explain with an example, perhaps from one of your papers, on how you managed to market your research by crafting it like a story?
Okay. How can you market your research? Well, in some fields, it's easier than others because in some fields, you've got that direct connection to like public interest. And I would say that in medical sciences, in pharmacy and fields like yours, for example, you're able to make that direct connection. So you have an ability, a way to like connect your research, your study to something that people are going to be interested in. And usually that's going to be the health benefits, the outcomes. Okay. So I would think about that first of all in pharmacy, particularly, like what are the benefits of this study to public health? That's one way of directly connecting your research, marketing your research, making your research interesting. So readers, not just within your field, but generally will think, I need to read this paper because this is relevant to me or potentially relevant to me. So that's what I would do. That's what I would say. Like, rather than keeping it dry and boring and just about the chemistry or just about the results of the study, you know, in the nitty gritty, in the kind of, you know, tiny details, what are the benefits? What are the outcomes? What's the wider relevance of this particular study to public health in your particular field? Great question. And we're always here if you'd like to send us examples of your work, if you'd like to give us like, you know, an email, drop us a message, we can give you some advice like on these specific questions around writing and publishing. Great session, great questions. Thank you so much.
She's also asking if you are open to mentoring students. And I think
Again, sorry, Lynn,
if you're open to mentor students.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, very much so, definitely.
If,
Yeah, just you know, drop me a line, connect over LinkedIn. Yeah, 100%, of course, absolutely. But again, let me say that I'm not a pharmacist, so I am a biologist, but I'm not a pharmacist. So I might not be the best person to mentor students in this particular subject area. You're in the right place. The IVPN network that's what the IVPN network is all about. So you know, that's the brilliant thing about this organization. You're going to get lots of support, lots of help from like-minded researchers and professionals in your particular subject area, which is super, super valuable.
okay, another question also. How do you manage to do a literature review effectively?
How do you
explain? Yeah.
Okay, great. Like, how do you do a literature review effectively? This is a big topic, and actually we've got quite a lot of other training materials on this topic. So if you drop me a line, I'll send you some other videos and other content on this. But yeah, like doing a literature review effectively can be confusing. Quick tip for this, from my own experience, is you know your area, you know your subject area, you know your question. Look at the reference lists initially of other papers published in your field, rather than going in directly and starting to use search engines to find papers, because that's going to give you lots of information coming back at you randomly. Some AI tools are out there as well at the moment, developing this kind of these kinds of techniques very effectively. But go into reference lists of papers very closely related to your particular research question and use them as a way into the literature. But yeah, as I say, I'll send you more information, more follow-up on that particular question. Thank you so much. Great question.
Okay, Nimra is asking, adding citation and in-text citations is exhausting for her. How to write ones in her own words?
Well, you can. I mean, absolutely. Most journals, unfortunately, most publishers have their own style guidelines on this. But yeah, like you can do it your own way. You can write these in your own style. Just make sure that you're getting all of the important information in there so that you're not missing something, because that would potentially be a reason for article rejection or grant rejection. later on down the road. So it is a good idea to use a standard template that you can get from, leading journals in your subject area, for example, so that you don't miss something, so that you don't end up in a situation where you send a paper to a journal, they're asking you for these statements, and then you send them a statement that doesn't have some information in it that they want. So I know it's boring, I know it's a pain, but you do have to go through this process, especially in medical healthcare research fields. Very, very important, these kinds of checklists. Thank you.
Also, Nimira is asking, which AI tools do you recommend, to use?
Which AI tools do I recommend to use? It depends what you want to do. I mean, that question is best answered by asking yourself, what do I need to do? What process do I need to speed up? Is it editing? Is it finding references? Is it formatting my paper? Is it coming up with a knowledge gap? There are hundreds and hundreds of different tools out there at the moment. So great question, Nimra. We would need to talk a little bit more in more detail. I see that you're asking about removing plagiarism. This is still done most effectively with the tool Authenticate. Okay, so that's what publishers use. That's what we would recommend that you use as well to check your papers before they get submitted to academic journals. Thank you, everyone. Great session. Great to have the chance to do this. Really my honor to be here again. And thanks everybody for your time and energy today.
Thank you, Doctor. Also, we have a question from Abdel Fattah. Can the clinical pharmacist publish research in scientific journals without having master degrees?
Yeah, clinical pharmacy is a very important field. And then there's lots of ways that you can publish qualitative research, survey-based research, like polypharmacy studies. Yes, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. We can help you with that. We have done lots of work in the past helping researchers with ideas for getting their research published. So yeah, there's always a way to get your paper published. And we work a lot actually with professional practicing pharmacists. So not necessarily research pharmacists, but people who are actually doing day-to-day dispensing and other compounding and pharmaceutical research. So yeah, do get in touch. Be great to talk more. Thank you so much. Great stuff. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've covered all of the questions. Okay. Thank you, Doctor, a lot. I want to express my sincere gratitude, and I've learned a lot and enjoyed the session too. And also, we're looking forward for the next sessions. If you, Doctor, could please write your yes. Okay. Okay, we're looking forward for the next sessions, and make sure to attend the next sessions with Dr. Garrett. We still have 2 sessions. So don't miss out on this. And also, I want to thank all the participants and attendees. Thank you for your questions, and thank you. Thank you, Doctor.